Hey everyone, it's ZLR here, and today I'm going to be doing my Week 7 recap for the NFL. And honestly, we had some pretty good games this week, I cannot lie. Um, did did pretty good on my predictions from last week as well. Um, yeah. Tomorrow you guys will hopefully see my predictions video. I know I work, like, yeah, I work, but uh that'll be out tomorrow at some point. But anyway, let's get right into this. As we have the Broncos win against the Saints 33 to 10. We had Bo Nix, 16 completions out of 26 attempts, 164 yards. We also had Javonte Williams with 14 carries, 88 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Bo Nix had 10 carries for 75 yards. Jaleel McLaughlin had uh, have 4 carries, 35 yards. I don't know why, but I had a brain fart there for a second. Audric Estime, 5 carries for 29 yards. And Jared Stidham carried the ball twice but got -2 yards from that. We also had Troy Franklin, 5 receptions for 50 yards. We had Lucas Kroll with 3 receptions for 41 yards. Javonte Williams with 3 receptions for 23 yards. Uh, we also had, oh, my phone's going slow. Perfect Devon Vele with 1 reception for 20 yards. Marvin Mims with 2 receptions for 18 yards. I actually literally had to check that because I thought I got the name wrong for some reason. Lil Jordan Humphrey, 2 receptions for 12 yards. And for the Saints side of things, we had Spencer Rattler with 25 completions out of 35 attempts. Um, Phone just went right back to the Broncos side of things. Spencer Rattler, 25 completions, 35 attempts for 172 yards. Uh, Jake Hayner with 3 completions out of 4 attempts, 38 yards, and a touchdown. We had uh, Kendre Miller with 6 carries, 36 yards. Spencer Rattler with 5 carries for 34 yards. Jamal Williams. Too many J. Williams in the league. 3 carries, 17 yards. Alvin Kamara, 7 carries for 10 yards. Cedric Wilson Jr. with with 6 receptions, 57 yards, and a touchdown. We had Mason Tipton with 6 receptions, 45 yards. We had Foster Moranu with 2 receptions for 38 yards. We had Bub Means, the man himself, 3 receptions, 37 yards. We had Jawan Johnson with 3 receptions for 18 yards. Alvin Kamara with 6 receptions for 14 yards. And Kendre Miller with 2 receptions for 1 yard. Then we had the Patriots and the Jaguars, with the Jaguars winning it 32 to 16. Um, Drake May had 26 completions out of 37 attempts, 276 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Ramondre Stevenson had 7 carries for 18 yards. Drake May had 3 carries for 18 yards. Antonio Gibson, um, 3 carries for 4 yards, and JaMychal Hasty with 2 carries for a -2 yards. Hunter Henry, 8 receptions for 92 yards. JaMychal Hasty, 5 receptions, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Kayshon Boutte with 1 reception for 33 yards. Austin Hooper with 4 receptions, 32 yards. KJ Osborne with 2 receptions, 26 yards, and a touchdown. Demario Douglas with 2 receptions for 14 yards. Kendrick Bourne with 1 reception for 14 yards. Antonio Gibson with 1 reception for 9 yards. Ramondre Stevenson with 2 receptions for 7 yards. And for the Jaguars side of things, we had Trevor Lawrence, 15 completions out of 20 attempts, 193 yards and a touchdown. Tank Bigsby had 26 carries, 118 yards and 2 touchdowns. We had Dearness Johnson with 9 carries for 38 yards. Trevor Lawrence had 2 carries for 13 yards. And Brian Thomas Jr. had 2 carries for 2 yards. Brian Thomas Jr. also had 5 receptions, 89 yards and a touchdown. Evan Ingram had 5 receptions for 35 yards. Dearness Johnson had 3 receptions for 32 yards. Christian Kirk had 1 reception for 24 yards. And Gabe Davis had 1 reception for 13 yards. Then we had the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings, with the Lions win at 31-29. This one was a very good game here. Jared Goff, 22 completions out of 25 attempts for 280 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs had 15 carries, 116 yards and 2 touchdowns. David Montgomery had 9 carries for 31 yards. We had Jalen Reeves-Maybin with 1 carry for 1 yard, and Jared Goff carried the ball twice but got -4 yards. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 8 receptions, 112 yards and a touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs had 4 receptions for 44 yards. David Montgomery had 3 receptions for 39 yards. We had Khalif Raymond with 3 receptions, 39 yards and a touchdown. We had Tim Patrick with 2 receptions for 25 yards. Sam Laporta with 1 reception for 25 yards. And Jameson Williams with 1 reception for -4 yards. Like I said, too many Jay Williams in the league. Especially when you're looking on the Google thing where it actually just says like for Sam Darnold it just says S Darnold. So yeah. Sometimes I have to look. But anyway, Sam Darnold, 22 completions out of 27 attempts, 259 yards, touchdown, interception. Aaron Jones, 14 carries for 93 yards and a touchdown. Sam Darnold had 4 carries, 39 yards. Ty Chandler had 2 carries for 4 yards, and Justin Jefferson had 1 carry for 3 yards. Justin Jefferson also had 7 receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown. Jalen Naylor had 4 receptions for 76 yards. We had Jordan Addison with 3 receptions for 66 yards. Aaron Jones with 3 receptions with 23 yards. We had Johnny Munt with 4 receptions for 8 yards. And also Josh Oliver, 1 reception for 5 yards. Then we had the Titans and the Bills, but the Bills win at 34-10. Mason Rudolph had 25 completions out of 40 attempts, 215 yards, touchdown, and an interception. Tony Pollard had 16 carries for 61 yards. We had Julius Chestnut with 3 carries for 15 yards, and Mason Rudolph had 5 carries for 13 yards. Chig Okonkwo had 4 receptions for 50 yards. Tyler Boyd had 5 receptions for 43 yards. Calvin Ridley had 3 receptions for 42 yards. We had Josh Weil with 3 receptions, 34 yards. We had Nick Vannett with 4 receptions, 25 yards. We had Nick Westbrook with 2 receptions, 10 yards, and a touchdown. We had Julius Chestnut with 1 reception for 9 yards. Tony Pollard had 2 receptions for 4 yards. And DeAndre Hopkins had 1 reception for -2 yards. Josh Allen had 21 completions out of 33 attempts for 323 yards and 2 touchdowns. We had Ray Davis with 5 carries, 41 yards, and a touchdown. James Cook had 12 carries, 32 yards, and a touchdown. Josh Allen had 3 carries for 1 yard. Keon Coleman had 4 receptions, 125 yards. Amari Cooper, the new addition, getting 4 receptions, 66 yards, and a touchdown. Khalil Shakir had 7 receptions for 65 yards. We had Dalton Kincaid with 3 receptions for 52 yards. Ray Davis with 1 reception for 6 yards. Dawson Knox with 1 reception for 5 yards. We had Ty Johnson with 1 reception, 4 yards, and a touchdown. Then we had the Dolphins and the Colts, with the Colts win at 16-10. We had Tim Boyle with 8 completions out of 13 attempts for 74 yards. Tyler Huntley had 7 completions out of 13 attempts for 87 yards and a touchdown. We had Devon Achane with 15 carries for 77 yards. Raheem Mostert with 11 carries for 50 yards. We had Jalen Wright with 5 carries for 33 yards. Tyler Huntley with 5 carries for 20 yards. We had Tyreek Hill with 1 carry for 5 yards. Tim Boyle had 1 carry for 4 yards. And Alec Ingold had 2 carries, -1 yard. We also had Jonnu Smith with 7 receptions, 96 yards, and a touchdown. Alec Ingold with 1 reception, 25 yards. Jalen Waddle, 1 reception. 1 reception per 11 yards. Malik Washington with 2 receptions for 9 yards. Devon Achane with 2 receptions for 8 yards. Tyreek Hill with 1 reception for 8 yards. Julian Hill. Oh God, they got 2 Hills on the team now. 1 reception for 4 yards. And for the Colts side of things, we had Anthony Richardson, 10 completions out of 24 attempts, 129 yards. He also had 14 carries for 56 yards. We had Tyler Goodson with 14 carries, 51 yards, and a touchdown. Trey Sermon with 8 carries for 36 yards. And Ashton Dulin with 1 carry for 12 yards. Pretty good for the 1 carry he had. Michael Pittman Jr., 3 receptions, 63 yards. Adonai Mitchell had 2 receptions for 30 yards. We had Alec Pierce with 2 receptions, 15 yards. Trey Sermon with 1 reception, 13 yards. We have Will Malroy, 1 reception, 5 yards. And Josh Downs, 1 reception for 3 yards. Then we had the Seahawks and the Falcons, with the Seahawks winning this game 34-14. We had Geno Smith with 18 completions out of 28 attempts, 207 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Jackson Smith even had a completion with 35 yards out of 1 attempt. We had Kenneth Walker, 14 carries, 69 yards, nice, and a touchdown. Geno Smith had 4 carries for 15 yards. Zach Charbonnet had, I don't know why I just said it like that. Charbonnet, I think it is 7 carries, 14 yards. And Kenny McIntosh, or is it McIntosh? Macintosh, I think. I don't know. My brain's fried right now. 1 carry for 5 yards. God damn it. DK Metcalf, 4 receptions, 99 yards, and a touchdown. Noah Fant, 4 receptions, 65 yards. Tyler Lockett, 4 receptions, 45 yards. Kenneth Walker, 2 receptions, 24 yards, and a touchdown. Jackson Smith, 3 receptions for 9 yards. AJ Barner, 1 reception for 5 yards. Zach Charbonnet had 1 reception, -5 yards. And I am very sad I'm not able to say Jake Bobo has any stats. Damn. Damn it. I wanted to say Jake Bobo a few times, but I guess not. Kirk Cousins, 24 completions out of 35 attempts, 232 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Michael Penix Jr., 1 completion out of 1 attempt for 14 yards. At least he got on the field. Yeah, I don't fucking know at this point. Bijan Robinson, 21 carries, 103 yards and a touchdown. Tyler Algier, 5 carries for 36 yards. Jace McClellan, I definitely probably butchered that name. 5 carries for 17 yards, and Kirko Chains had 1 carry, -1 yard. Kyle Pitts had 7 receptions for 65 yards. Drake London had 6 receptions, 63 yards, and a touchdown. Darnell Mooney had 5 receptions for 46 yards. Bijan Robinson had 3 receptions for 40 yards. We had Casey Washington with 1 reception for 14 yards. Ray McLeod with 2 receptions, 9 yards. And Tyler Algier had 1 reception for 9 yards. Then we had the Texans and the Packers, and I also called this game the Tom Grossi versus Stroud's game in my predictions video. And the Packers / Grossi's got the win 24-22 against the Strouds. Tom Grossi, I'm very sorry. And I hope your car doesn't get blown up. But anyway, besides the goofiness there, CJ Stroud, 10 completions out of 21 attempts, 86 yards. Joe Mixon, 25 carries, 115 yards, and 2 touchdowns. CJ Stroud had 5 carries for 19 yards. Dare Ungambale had 1 carry for 6 yards. And Damian Pierce had 2 carries for 2 yards. We had Dalton Schultz with 1 reception, 28 yards. Stephon Diggs had 5 receptions for 23 yards. We had Cade Stover with 1 reception, 15 yards. Xavier Hutchinson, 1 reception, 11 yards. Joe Mixon had 2 receptions for 9 yards. And for the Packers side of things, we had Jordan Love, 24 completions out of 33 attempts, 220 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Josh Jacobs had 12 carries, 76 yards. Emmanuel Wilson had 5 carries for 11 yards. Jaden Reed had a carry but didn't get anything out of it. Bo Melton had 1 carry for -1 yard. And Christian Watson had 1 carry for -4 yards. Romeo Doubs had 8 receptions, 94 yards. Dontavian Wicks had 3 receptions, 48 yards and a touchdown. Tucker Kraft had 3 receptions, 33 yards and a touchdown. Josh Jacobs had 5 receptions, 16 yards and a touchdown. Jaden Reed had 2 receptions for 10 yards. Christian Watson had 1 reception for 9 yards. Bo Melton had 1 reception for 8 yards. And Ben Sims had 1 reception for 2 yards. Then we had the Bengals and the Browns, and this game was actually kind of a lot worse than what the score indicates. The Bengals won 21-14. Joe Burrow, 15 completions out of 25 attempts, 181 yards and 2 touchdowns. We had Chase Brown with 15 carries for 44 yards. Jamar Chase with 1 carry for 11 yards. Zach Moss with 6 carries for 7 yards, and Joe Burrow had 3 carries, -3 yards. We had T. Higgins, 4 receptions, 82 yards and a touchdown. Jamar Chase had 5 receptions, 55 yards and a touchdown. Zach Moss had 3 receptions for 33 yards. Chase Brown had 2 receptions for 9 yards. And Mike Gesicki had 1 reception for 2 yards. And for the Brown side of things, we had 3 different quarterbacks because Deshaun Watson blew out his Achilles. Just boom, gone. Just like that. And honestly, I do hope he gets better as soon as possible. My computer wants to do a Windows update. No. But like I said, I do hope he gets better as soon as possible. Even with or without the allegations he already has. Honestly, a Achilles injury, probably one of the worst ones to have. But he had 15 completions out of 17 attempts, 128 yards. He was having a good game too. Dorian Thompson Robinson, haven't said that name in a while. 11 completions out of 24 attempts, 82 yards, and 2 interceptions. And famous Jameis Winston with 5 completions out of 11 attempts, 67 yards, and a touchdown. Because Jameis Winston is built like that. Dorian Thompson Robinson had 3 carries, 44 yards. And it's so good to say this guy's name again. Nick Chubb, 11 carries, 22 yards, and a touchdown. It's good to see you back, Nick Chubb. We had Pierre Strong Jr., 3 carries for 6 yards. Donta Foreman, 2 carries for 5 yards. Deshaun Watson had 2 carries but got nothing out of it. Then we had Cedric Tillman, 8 receptions, 81 yards. David Njoku, 10 receptions, 75 yards, and a touchdown. We had Jordan Atkins with 4 receptions, 42 yards. Elijah Moore with 6 receptions for 41 yards. Jerry Jeudy with 1 reception, 18 yards. Nick Chubb with 1 reception for 10 yards. And Pierre Strong Jr. with 1 reception for 9 yards. Then we had the Philadelphia Eagles and the New York Giants, with the Eagles win 28-3 as predicted. This was not going to be a fun game for the Giants. Jalen Hurts with 10 completions out of 14 attempts, 114 yards and a touchdown. Kenny Pickett attempted a pass, did not complete it though. Saquon Barkley in his return to New York to face them. 17 carries, 176 yards and a touchdown. Just Jesus Christ. Kenneth Gainwell had 13 carries for 56 yards. Jalen Hurts had 7 carries for 22 yards and 2 touchdowns. And Will Shipley had 8 carries for 15 yards. We had A.J. Brown, 5 receptions, 89 yards, and a touchdown. Saquon Barkley had 2 receptions for 11 yards. Kenneth Gainwell had 1 reception for 11 yards. Grant Calcaterra had 1 reception for 5 yards. And Devonta Smith had 1 reception for -2 yards. For the Giants side of things, we had Daniel Jones, 14 completions out of 21 attempts, 99 yards. And Drew Lock, or as Branda Perna calls him, Horsecock Lock, 3 completions out of 8 attempts for 6 yards. Tyrone Tracy Jr., 6 carries, 23 yards. Daniel Jones, 5 carries for 20 yards. Devin Singletary with 5 carries, 18 yards. Drew Lock with 1 carry for 13 yards. And Eric Gray with 1 carry for 2 yards. Malik Neighbors, 4 receptions, 41 yards. Wan'Dale Robinson with 6 receptions for, what was that, 23 yards? Oh, yeah, that was correct, 23 yards. Darius Slayton, 1 reception for 11 yards, as well as Daniel Bellinger. Tyrone Tracy Jr. had 3 receptions for 9 yards. Eric Gray had 1 reception for 7 yards. And Devin Singletary had 1 reception for 3 yards. Then we had the Raiders and the Rams, with the Rams winning 20-15. We had Gardner Minshew Mania, with 15 completions out of 34 attempts, 154 yards, and 3 interceptions. Aiden O'Connell, the UFL guy, that was signed there. 6 completions, 10 attempts, 52 yards. Alexander Madison had 23 carries for 92 yards. We had Zamir White with 3 carries for 13 yards. We had Trey Tucker with 1 carry for 11 yards. DJ Turner with 1 carry for 4 yards. And Gardner Minshew with 1 carry for 2 yards. Brock Bowers, 10 receptions for 93 yards. Trey Tucker with 3 receptions for 36 yards. Alexander Madison with 3 receptions for 31 yards. We have Harrison Bryant with 2 receptions for 19 yards. Zamir White with 1 reception for 14 yards. And DJ Turner with 2 receptions for 13 yards. Then we had Matthew Stafford, 14 completions, 23 attempts, 154 yards, and 8 interception. Kyren Williams, 21 carries, 76 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We had Xavier Smith with 2 carries, 30 yards. We have Blake Corum with 3 carries, 11 yards. And Matthew Stafford carried the ball twice but got -2 yards. We had Tyler Johnson, 4 receptions, 57 yards. Tutu Atwell, 6 receptions, 51 yards. Colby Parkinson, 2 receptions for 32 yards. We had Demarcus Robinson, 1 reception for 9 yards. And Hunter Long with 1 reception for 5 yards. Then we had the Washington Commanders and the Carolina Panthers, with the Commanders winning at 40-7. We had Andy Dalton, 11 completions out of 16 attempts, 93 yards, and 2 interceptions. Bryce Young, 2 completions out of 2 attempts for -4 yards. Chuba Hubbard had 17 carries, 52 yards, and a touchdown. Miles Sanders had 3 carries for 34 yards. Xavier Leggett had 1 carry for 6 yards, and Andy Dalton had 2 carries for 3 yards. Then we had Jatavion Sanders with 6 receptions for 61 yards. We had Deontay Johnson with 1 reception, 17 yards. Jalen Cocker with 1 reception for 10 yards. Ian Thomas with 2 receptions for 4 yards. Xavier Leggett with 2 receptions for 3 yards. And Miles Sanders with 1 reception for -6 yards. The Commanders, hope Jaden Daniels is okay, but Marcus Mariota, 18 completions, 23 attempts, 205 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Jaden Daniels, 2 completions out of 2 attempts for 6 yards. Brian Robinson had... my phone keeps on going slow. 12 carries, 71 yards, and a touchdown. Jaden Daniels had 3 carries for 50 yards. Jeremy McNichols had 7 carries for 42 yards. Marcus Mariota had 11 carries for 34 yards. And Austin Eckler had 4 carries for 17 yards. Scary Terry had 6 receptions, 98 yards. Zach Ertz had 4 receptions, 40 yards, and a touchdown. Omalad Zacchaeus had 4 receptions, 25 yards. We had Dyami Brown with 1 reception, 23 yards. Noah Brown had one reception, 16 yards. Ben Sinnott had 2 receptions, 6 yards, and a touchdown. And Austin Eckler had 2 receptions for 3 yards. Then we had the Chiefs and the 49ers, with the Chiefs staying undefeated 28-18. Patrick Mahomes, 16 completions out of 27 attempts, 154 yards, and 2 interceptions. Kareem Hunt had 22 carries, 78 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Patrick Mahomes had 5 carries, 39 yards, and a touchdown. Mecole Hardman had 2 carries, 38 yards, and a touchdown. Carson Steele had 6 carries, 17 yards. Sam J. Perine had 2 carries, 6 yards. Xavier Worthy had 1 carry for 5 yards. And Jaden Hicks had 1 carry for 1 yard. Then we had Noah Gray with 4 receptions, 66 yards. Sam J. Perine with 1 reception, 22 yards. Xavier Worthy with 3 receptions for 19 yards. Travis Kelce, 4 receptions for 17 yards. Mecole Hardman with 1 reception for 17 yards. Justin Watson, 1 reception, 8 yards. Kareem Hunt, 2 receptions for 5 yards. And for the 49ers side of things, Brock Purdy, 17 completions out of 31 attempts, 212 yards, and 3 interceptions. Jordan Mason, 14 carries, 58 yards. Brock Purdy, 8 carries, 27 yards, 2 touchdowns. Kyle Juszczyk, 1 carry for 14 yards. And Isaac Guerendo, 1 carry for 2 yards. Jordan Kittle had 6 receptions, 92 yards. We had Jacob Counting with 2 receptions for, I think that's at 50 yards. Yeah, for 50 yards. Brandon Ayuk had 2 receptions, 23 yards. Tore his ACL and his MCL. I hope he is better as soon as possible. Ricky Pearsall, 3 receptions, 21 yards. Jordan Mason had 2 receptions for 11 yards. We had Ronnie Bell with 1 reception for 10 yards. And Isaac Guerendo with 1 reception for 5 yards. Then we had the Steelers and the Jets, with the Steelers winning it 37-15. We had Aaron Rodgers complete 24 passes out of 39 for 276 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. We had Breece Hall, 12 carries, 38 yards, and a touchdown. We had Isaiah Davis with 1 carry for 12 yards, and Braylon Allen with 2 carries for 4 yards. Breece Hall had 6 receptions for 103 yards. Garrett Wilson had 5 receptions for 61 yards. Allen Lazard had 4 receptions for 58 yards. Davante Adams had 3 receptions for 30 yards. Mike Williams had 1 reception for 15 yards. We had Tyler Conklin with 4 receptions, 7 yards, and a touchdown. And Braylon Allen had 1 reception for 2 yards. We had the Steelers side of things. Russell Wilson, he decided to cook and didn't burn the kitchen, as he had 16 completions out of 29 attempts, 264 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Najee Harris had 21 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown. Jaylen Warren had 12 carries, 44 yards. Russell Wilson had 3 carries, 3 yards, and a touchdown. George Pickens had 5 receptions, 111 yards, and a touchdown. Pat Freiermuth had 2 receptions, 51 yards. Darnell Washington had 4 receptions for 36 yards. We had Calvin Austin with 1 reception for 36 yards. Van Jefferson with 2 receptions, 15 yards, and a touchdown. Jaylen Warren had 2 receptions for 15 yards. Then we had the first out of 2 Monday night games, the Ravens and the Buccaneers, with the Ravens winning it 41-31. We had Lamar Jackson, 17 completions out of 22 attempts, 281 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Derrick Henry had 15 carries for 169 yards. Lamar Jackson had 9 carries for 52 yards. Zay Flowers had 1 carry for 19 yards. And Justice Hill had 5 carries for 4 yards. Rashad Bateman had 4 receptions, 121 yards, and a touchdown. Justice Hill had 3 receptions for 44 yards and a touchdown. Mark Andrews had 4 receptions, 41 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Nelson Aguilar had 1 reception, 20 yards. Isaiah Likely had 2 receptions, 17 yards. Charlie Kohler had 1 reception, 14 yards. Derrick Henry had 1 reception, 13 yards, and a touchdown. Zay Flowers had 1 reception for 11 yards. And for the Buccaneers side of things, we had Baker Mayfield, 31 completions out of 45 attempts, 370 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. A lot of their scoring was in garbage time. Rashad White, 10 carries, 40 yards. We had Sean Tucker with 5 carries, 29 yards. Bucky Irving with 9 carries, 23 yards, and a touchdown. Baker Mayfield had 5 carries for 22 yards. And Jalen McMillan had 1 carry for 11 yards. We had Cade Otton, 8 receptions, 100 yards. Rashad White with 6 receptions, 71 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Chris Godwin, I hope he gets better as soon as possible. 7 receptions, 65 yards. Bucky Irving, 3 receptions, 54 yards. Mike Evans, 1 reception, 25 yards, and a touchdown. Trey Palmer, 1 reception for 16 yards. We had Jalen McMillan, 3 receptions for 15 yards. Sterling Shepard with 1 reception for 15 yards. And Sean Tucker with 1 reception for 9 yards. And for the final game of the week, we had the Chargers and the Cardinals, with the Cardinals winning at 17-15. We had Justin Herbert, 27 completions out of 39 attempts for 349 yards. J.K. Dobbins had 14 carries for 40 yards. We had Kimani Vidal with 3 carries for 10 yards. Justin Herbert, 2 carries for 8 yards. Hassan Haskins with 2 carries for 2 yards. Jalen Reagor, 1 carry for -1 yard. Will Dissly, 8 receptions, 81 yards. We had Joshua Palmer with 4 receptions for 63 yards. Ladd McConkey with 5 receptions, 46 yards. Simi Fehoko with 3 receptions, 45 yards. Jalen Reagor with 1 reception for 41 yards. Stone Smart with 1 reception, 31 yards. J.K. Dobbins, 3 receptions, 26 yards. Kimani Vidal with 1 reception for 9 yards. And Eric Tomlinson with 1 reception for 7 yards. And for the Cardinals, we had Kyler Murray, 14 completions, 26 attempts, 145 yards, a touchdown, and 8 interception. James Conner had 19 carries for 101 yards. Kyler Murray had 6 carries, 64 yards, and a touchdown. Amari Demercado had 1 carry for 14 yards. And Clayton Tune had 3 carries for 2 yards. Trey McBride had 5 receptions, 51 yards. James Conner had 2 receptions for 51 yards. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 3 receptions for 21 yards. We had Michael Wilson with 1 reception for 15 yards. Greg Dortch had 1 reception, 5 yards, and a touchdown. Elijah Higgins and also Tip Raymond had 1 reception for 1 yard. And that is it for this week. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like, subscribe, comment, do whatever you really want to do. And I'll see you all with the predictions video tomorrow.